In the annals of military history, there are tales of valor, strategy, and nations clashing over ideologies. But few wars are as bizarre as the one fought in 1932 on the plains of Western Australia, a conflict that would come to be known as the Great Emu War. Next, old sepia-toned footage of vast Australian farmlands, overlaid with images of newspapers from the 1930s. Scene 1, Introduction, a war of feathers and bullets, in a tone mixing drama and slight humour. In the vast, sunburnt plains of Western Australia, 1932 was a year like no other. Australia, fresh from the devastation of the Great Depression, would find itself at war. But this was no ordinary war. This was a battle not against humans, but against a formidable foe of a different kind. The emu. Next, wide shot of the Western Australian outback. Dry, desolate fields stretch out as far as the eye can see. These towering, flightless birds would become the unlikely adversaries of the Australian military in what history would come to remember as the Great Emu War. Next, black and white archival footage of emus running across the Australian outback. With over 20,000 emus wreaking havoc on farmland, desperate farmers called on the government for help, and the government responded with soldiers. Scene 2. The battle begins. A small dusty town in Western Australia. Farmers are gathered around, discussing their plight. Farmer 1 comments, frustrated, "They're everywhere. Every time we plant a crop, those blasted birds show up and trample the lot." Farmer 2 says, "They're not just trampling, they're eating everything. How are we supposed to survive?" Next, close-up of a telegram being sent to the government requesting military assistance. Seeing no other option, the farmers turned to the government for help, and help they received in the form of Major G.P.W. Meredith of the Royal Australian Artillery and his soldiers, armed with 2 Lewis machine guns and 10,000 rounds of ammunition. Scene 3. The first encounter. Next, Australian soldiers set up their machine guns in the outback, preparing for the emus. The soldiers look determined, but slightly perplexed. Soldier 1, who is looking at the machine gun comments, "Never thought I'd be using this against birds." Major Meredith replies, "Orders are orders. Let's get this done." Next, the soldiers spot a group of emus in the distance. The emus are moving erratically, not making it easy for the soldiers to aim. But the emus were no easy targets. Fast, agile, and highly organized in their disorganization, the emus quickly proved they were not to be underestimated. Next, the soldiers open fire, but the emus scatter in all directions. The machine gun jams. The soldiers exchange frustrated glances. Soldier 2, struggling with the gun, says, "These things are impossible to hit." Next, a wide shot of emus sprinting away, seemingly unscathed. The soldiers are left in the dust, shaking their heads in disbelief. Day after day, the soldiers chased the emus, but the birds always seemed to be one step ahead, dodging bullets and disappearing into the bush. The Great Emu War was quickly turning into a comedy of errors. Scene 4. A tactical retreat. Next, a meeting between Major Meredith and his superiors. Maps of the area are spread out on the table. Superior officer comments, "So, Major, what's the status?" Major Meredith says, with slightly embarrassed, "Sir, these birds, they're like ghosts. We've expended thousands of rounds, but it's like shooting at shadows." Next, archival footage of newspapers with headlines like "Emus outrun army" and "Feathered foes too much for troops." News of the army's struggles spread quickly, and the media had a field day, mocking the military's inability to defeat the emus. Next, the soldiers packing up their gear, looking defeated. After weeks of failed attempts, the government decided to withdraw the military. The emus had won. The Great Emu War was over. Scene 5. The aftermath. Next, shots of emus roaming freely, undisturbed in the Australian outback. The emus continued to roam the outback, free and undefeated. The farmers would eventually have to resort to other means to protect their crops, but the memory of the Great Emu War would live on as a bizarre chapter in Australian history. Next, a shot of a modern-day memorial plaque dedicated to the Great Emu War, with tourists taking photos and reading the inscription. Today, the Great Emu War serves as a reminder of the unpredictability of nature the limits of human control, and the often absurd lengths we'll go to in our attempts to impose order on the world. Scene 6. Conclusion. Lessons learned next. A shot of the vast, empty Australian outback at sunset, with the sound of distant emu calls echoing in the background. So what did we learn from the Great Emu War?